Let's get some reaction to all of that. Lizette Lancaster is the Hub Manager for the Crime and Justice Hub at the Institute for Security Studies. Lizette, good afternoon to you. Thank you for your time. All right, a lot of numbers coming out today. I suppose really the numbers that matter are murders and violent crimes. Those seem to be slightly up.
Yes, so as the Minister indicated, murder is up by 1.4% over the year. That's for actual incidents. But we have seen that over the past 8 years, since about 2012, we've seen a 37% increase in murder, and for the same period, a 43% increase in armed robberies. Now, for us at the Institute for Security Studies, that's what is concerning, because these are the crimes that we fear the most. The armed robberies happen in our homes, in our school, sometimes around our schools, in the streets, on the way to work, from school to the way to school. And often we know that, for instance, street robberies is the gateway to more serious armed robberies, such as business robberies, carjackings, and cash and transit. And of course, part of it is that carjacking has gone up by over 13%, which represents over that 8 years a 93% increase in the number of carjackings.
That's a high number. I mean, that basically means that carjackings have doubled. Why is it going up? What's driving that? I mean, are there syndicates? Is it just the sort of conditions on the ground?
It is difficult to say without having an analysis, of the modus operandi, where these happen, why they happen, the times. They did give us a bit of that indication, and we know that these things happen mostly during the peak hours of the night and so forth. We know that it's mostly sedans that are being hijacked. But it is, and that these things happen very close to highways and such. Gauteng accounts for 50% of all the hijackings. And we saw these huge decreases in the early 2000s because of tracking companies and the need to install trackers. But definitely something has gone on. We also know that crimes move. Especially robberies, if people feel that the heat is on, say, with cash and transits or big item stuff, then they move to other forms of robbery. So it's something that really needs some investigation and lots of partnership building around why this is happening.
There was a time in Gauteng, I mean, as you say, the hotspot for carjackings near highways. I mean, when Mzwandile Petros was the Gauteng Police Commissioner, he did something very simple. He took those police armoured cars, some of them actually didn't move on their own anymore, and he just put them at highway on-ramps and off-ramps, and that seemed to have a big impact.
Well, we've seen that still continues to some extent. Surely last year we still saw some of those cars at the highways. The problem is that very often, especially with robberies, with resources being pulled away from these type of operations towards, protest action, towards now the lockdown restrictions, people are seeing, and we don't know what the crime stats look like now, right? Because these crime stats are already 4 months out of outdated, because it ended in March this year. But we know that with protest action and other type of operations, it frees up or it takes policing resources away, and that we do not then have the patrols that we normally have. And furthermore, we know that crime intelligence has been decimated. They've got concerted efforts to rebuild it now in the police under new leadership. But I mean, it is literally decimated. And that is why it is very difficult to get the intelligence behind these syndicates. And that's possibly one of the biggest drivers for the surge in all sorts of armed robberies over the past 8 years.
You talk about police crime intelligence, and of course you're referring to what happened over the sort of era when then President Jacob Zuma was in charge, and there's a whole contestation around that as well, we shouldn't forget. But we also have a large number of police officers. I mean, the number of police officers went up by about a third about 10 years ago. Do we need more officers, or do we just need to use them more effectively from what you're saying?
Well, Stephen, you've said it. We need to use them more effectively. It's not about more police, as it is about the effective allocation of police resources. Also the smarter use of policing. We know, for instance, that these syndicates, from street robbers to hijackers and stuff, but especially the street robberies that make up 57% of all aggravated robberies, happen in very localized areas over very specific time periods. And we really need to focus on those areas through intelligence, through proper analysis of these crimes and the modus operandi. We know, for instance, that about 50% of robberies happen in less than 10% of the police precincts. So it is really, really important that we locate where these places are that are so hard hit, and to have the right resources on the ground at these times. So it's a matter of more effective policing, more evidence-based policing, making sure that the strategies that are being used are working. If they don't, you try and adapt to something else.
We're speaking about this because the crime statistics have been released today. As you say, they're 4 months out of date. It's for this particular financial year. In a way, I've got to ask, I mean, should we be having the conversation the way we are? What I'm trying to get to is, should we actually have crime statistics released every week?
Well, it is very difficult. We understand that there's a lot of work that goes into these crime statistics. They are not easy to compile, as General Sekukune, the head of the Crime Stats Registrar, said today. They need to verify that these are correct and such. So it's a huge job. But what we do know now, and that's what we are very encouraged by, is that we will see quarterly releases of these crime stats. So I think in 2 weeks from now, they'll release for Q1 of this financial year, which is April, May and June. So we'll have some stats for the lockdown, which of course might lull us into a false sense of security, because we know that crime has had marked decreases during the restrictions and the very tight level lockdowns. But of course, we also know now that crime is rising quite dramatically. So it's quite important that when we get these statistics for this current period, we really pay attention.
Lizette Lancaster, thanks very much indeed from the Institute for Security Studies.